Okay, so what we're doing here is we are taking bile acids and bilirubin and drugs like organic anions and cations, and what we're going to do is we're going to bring them into the liver and modify them and then excrete them through the bile. Alright, so the first thing we're going to look at is just housekeeping transporters in hepatocytes. So we just have, as you can see here, sodium potassium ATPase, GLUT2, sodium amino acid, chlorine, chloride ion, potassium ion, calcium hydrogen ATPase, which we haven't seen before, and a double sodium bicarb co-transport. And then on the apical membrane, our whole purpose is to get bicarb out, because remember, this is the bile duct. So we need some bicarb out. So we're going to get that chloride in to exchange it, and then we're going to exchange and then get that chloride back out so that we can do it again. And then also we can get bicarb out and get sulfates in. Now what sulfate is important for is because sulfate is going to be used in some of these reactions. Sulfate and glucuronate are our Y negatives. Glycine and taurine are our Z negatives. Bile acids are considered HBAs, and unconjugated bile salts are BA negatives. Conjugated bile salts are bile acids with Z negatives, as we already said, were glycine and taurine. Okay. Now, what are we going to do here? Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is let's go ahead and focus on our bile acids. So this is our enterohepatic circulation. Alright, so there are three ways that you can get the bile in. Either it can diffuse, conjugate as an acid, a weak acid or a neutral acid, HBA, and diffuse its way in, and then dissociate into, what do you call that thing? An unconjugated bile salt and an H positive. Or you can come in via organic anion transporter 1. It's a counter transporter with chlorine, and so now you have a free unconjugated bile salt. Or you can come in as an unconjugated bile acid or bile salt, an unconjugated bile salt, or a conjugated bile salt with glycine or taurine, and that's a co-transporter with sodium. Alright, so now we've got to modify these things so that we can get out via the bile canaliculus. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to take this, there are two ways we can go. We can either have free unconjugated bile salts, which need to be bound to something or nothing. So what can we bind them to? We can bind them with Y negatives, that's glucuronate or sulfate. We can bind them with taurine or glycine to make a BA-Z negative, or we can keep them as is. Now, if they were bound to the if they were conjugated coming in, so they were conjugated bile salts with glycine or taurine, then they have a different pathway. Those are bound to a binding protein intracellular. Now, when they're ready to go out, be excreted through the bile canaliculus, they release the binding protein and they just join your pool of conjugated bile acids. Now, there are two ways we can get it out. We can either use multi-drug resistant associated protein 2, and that's if it's conjugated with glucuronate or sulfate, or you can use bile salt exporter protein, and that'll get your conjugated bile salts with taurine or glycine out along with your free bile acids. Both of those are ATP dependent. Okay? The next pathway we're going to do is bilirubin. Now remember, bilirubin is coming in via the blood from other cells or hepatocytes bound to albumin because it's unconjugated, which means it can't travel in blood by itself. It's not water soluble. So albumin drops it off, and there are three ways it can get in, like Tariq showed us. All right? Either it can get in via, just like we saw with bile acids, an organic anion transport protein 1, bilirubin countertransport with chloride ion. It can get in through an electroneutral pathway or an electrogenic pathway. So now we've got bilirubin. Remember, this is broken down heme. Okay. Now, what it's going to do is it's going to go straight to the ER, and what bilirubin wants more than anything is to be conjugated. We've already opened the ring. We've already reduced the ring, so biliverdin reductase has reduced the ring, but now what we would want to do is we want to conjugate it by binding it to glucuranates. So we're going to use what's the UGT?
UDP glucuronal transferase.
Right, very good. UDP glucuronal transferase, and we're going to stick some glucuronal groups on there. So we're going to have mono and diglucuronide bilirubin, and then those can then be transported out via multi-drug resistant resistant associated protein 2, and now they're in the bile canalicula's. Okay, notice we have one here with bile acids and one here. So similarities in the pathways. OATP1s, which I didn't put the P right there, and then multi-drug resistant associated protein 2s. All right. Now we've got organic anions and organic cations.
And those are going to be important in phase 1 and phase 2 biotransformation.
Okay, and we'll go over that in a second. We'll let Tariq explain that to us. All right, so let's do cations first because that's the one I know best. Either you can have an organic cation transporter 1. Okay, so that's for small drugs, for small cations. You can have an organic anion transporter 1 gene product, and that's for bulky cations. Or you can have an organic cation hydrogen counterporter. And notice you have one of those on the apical membrane down here, organic cation hydrogen counterporter. You can have a multi-drug resistant protein 1, which is different than multi-drug resistant associated protein 2, as we saw with bile acids, bilirubin, and organic anion excretion. Cations are significantly, what's the word I'm looking for? Unique. All right. Or you could have this phospholipid flippase, this multi-drug resistant protein 3. It's a phospholipid flippase, and that's how you recycle your phospholipids. Okay. Or you could go your anion way. Okay. Organic anions. So this is your drugs. All right. So drugs come in via OATP1. Makes sense. We've had a bunch of those. Both of them are OATP1s. Now, they can either come in and be countertransported with chlorine, as we've seen in bile acids and as we've seen in bilirubin, or they can come in exchange for glutathione. Now, once they come in, they're going to bind with glucuronate or sulfate, which is just like what we saw in bile acids, free bile acids. So this pathway is very, very similar to free bile acids, except now we have glutathione, which makes sense because we're breaking down drugs. All right, and then so the organic anion glucuronate or sulfate conjugate can go out via multi-drug resistant associated protein 2, just like bile acids and just like bilirubin. Okay? And so once those are out there in the bile canalicula's, or we can have this glutathione, this reduced glutathione, GSH, and what it can do is it can go ahead and bind to glucuronate or sulfate and get its butt out of there as well. All right, so now Tariq's going to tell us the two phases of biotransformation of drugs.
All right.
Hey, Tariq.
Hi, Jim. How's it going? So basically the two phases of biotransformation. We got two phases going on here. That's 4. This is 2. So anyway, 2 phases of biotransformation. What's going on? I have just taken Tylenol or some sort of drug that I need to now metabolize so that way it can work on whatever I'm suffering from, right? So, here's the example. Phase 1, biotransformation. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to end up activating my cytochrome P450 enzymes, right? So I'm going to end up bringing the metabolites into the liver. So that way I can activate those enzymes and end up using those enzymes to react with the drug that I have just taken. And the products that I'm going to end up making are going to be largely polar in nature, although it was never specified that they were going to be water-soluble. And the products of the overall drug reaction that has just happened, or the metabolite reaction, are either going to be excreted in the urine or they're going to be processed further in phase 2 of biotransformation. So in phase 2 of biotransformation, what's going on here is I'm going to take my phase 1 of biotransformation and I'm going to process that thing even further. And I'm going to do that all in the hepatocyte. And what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to end up making my product water-soluble. And the reason I want to make this water-soluble is so that way I can better eliminate the product as an inert waste product, either in the bile or in the urine or quite possibly in the feces. The whole goal here is for ways to safely eliminate my stuff, my metabolites that I just took.
And Tariq takes a lot of drugs, right, Tariq?
Oh my gosh.
All right, thanks, Tariq.
No problem, Jerry.